What if I told you that the very people Jesus came to save, his own, rejected him? Behind the story most of us know lies a deeper mystery, woven into the fabric of divine justice and human betrayal. In the shadows of history, a silent resistance grew, fueled by hopes and fears, rooted in thousands of years of prophecy and tradition. The greatest paradox in the story of salvation is that the Messiah, sent to bring light, was met with rejection by those he loved most. This divine whisper hints at a profound truth, one that challenges our understanding of God's plan and invites us to peer beyond the surface into a mystery that still echoes through eternity. Why did the chosen people turn away? Was it simply disbelief, or was there a divine purpose hidden in their rejection? The answers are more startling than we can imagine, and uncovering them might forever change the way we see God's incredible work in the world. In the quiet darkness before dawn, the ancient land of Israel lay shrouded in a silence that seemed almost sacred, as if holding its breath in anticipation of a divine revelation. The hills, the valleys, and the crowded streets of Jerusalem pulsed with a restless energy, a tension born from centuries of hope, longing, and expectation. It was in this space between heaven and earth that the story of a promised Messiah unfolded, a story woven into the very fabric of Jewish tradition and prophecy, yet one that would soon reveal a divine paradox that still echoes through the corridors of time. From the earliest days of Abraham's covenant, God's promise had been whispered into the hearts of a chosen people, anchoring their identity in a sacred hope that one day a deliverer would rise from David's lineage, a king who would restore Israel's glory and establish an everlasting kingdom. This hope became the guiding star, shaping their prayers, their dreams, and their expectations. Prophets like Isaiah and Daniel painted visions of a righteous ruler, one who would come with power, justice, and divine authority to lead God's people to peace. Yet, amidst these divine visions, there was also an undercurrent of anticipation for a different kind of Messiah, one who would not wield a sword or raise armies, but who would bring inner transformation, forgiveness, and spiritual renewal. The people of Israel, bound by their covenant and their sacred law, yearned for deliverance, yet they envisioned it through the lens of their hopes rooted in the political and military liberation from oppression. As centuries passed, these expectations became deeply ingrained in their collective consciousness, shaping a vision of the Messiah as a mighty king from David's line, someone who would rise and overthrow their enemies with divine might. But then, through the unfolding pages of history, a different figure appeared, one who challenged every expectation, every tradition, every hope that was anchored in conquest and power. Jesus of Nazareth entered the scene quietly, yet with undeniable authority, teaching love, forgiveness, and humility. He spoke of a kingdom not of this world, where suffering and sacrifice were the path to true greatness. His words echoed through the streets and synagogues, stirring both awe and confusion, as many struggled to reconcile this peaceful, humble teacher with the fiery, victorious Messiah they had long anticipated. The divine whisper of prophecy suddenly seemed to clash with the quiet presence of this man. The tension grew palpable. Prophetic promises of a glorious king stood in stark contrast to Jesus' message of servanthood. In this divine whisper, something profound was stirring, a mystery beyond human comprehension. Perhaps God planned to redefine what true victory looked like, to reveal that the kingdom of God was rooted in spiritual rebirth rather than worldly conquest. But the question remained, how would this new vision be received? Would the people, with their hopes fixed on a different kind of Messiah, embrace this divine revelation? Or would they turn away, unable to see beyond their expectations? As the shadows lengthen, and the night prepares to give way to dawn, the story of rejection begins to unfold. An act that would change the course of history and reveal a divine purpose hidden in divine silence. If you find these truths compelling, please support this channel by subscribing, liking, and activating notifications. Sharing these messages helps spread the divine whisper, bringing hope and understanding to those seeking the truth. Now, prepare to witness the unfolding of a divine mystery that will challenge everything you thought you knew about salvation, love, and divine purpose as the story moves toward its most profound revelations. Since the earliest days of their history, the Jewish people have carried within them a profound sense of divine promise and hope. Their identity is deeply rooted in the covenant made with Abraham, a promise that their descendants would be blessed and that through them all nations would be blessed. This covenant became the foundation of their faith, shaping their understanding of God's plans and His faithfulness. Over generations, this hope evolved into a powerful expectation of a Messiah, an anointed one who would come to deliver Israel from oppression and restore its former glory. The law of Moses, given through divine revelation, provided moral guidance and reinforced the idea that God's chosen people had a special role in His divine plan. The prophetic writings further fueled this hope, with figures like Isaiah and Jeremiah describing a future ruler from David's line who would reign with justice and righteousness. These prophecies painted a vision of a victorious king, a political and military leader who would overthrow oppressors and re-establish Israel's sovereignty. The people longed for this deliverer, imagining a Messiah who would wield power, lead armies, and bring national liberation. Their expectations were shaped by centuries of exile, foreign domination, and longing for independence. The idea of a conquering king was intertwined with their understanding of divine favor and intervention. They believed that this Messiah would be a descendant of David, someone with the authority to restore their kingdom and bring peace to Jerusalem once again. For many, this hope was not just political but spiritual, a fulfillment of God's promises to David and the hope that God's salvation was imminent. But within this landscape of hope, there was also a quieter, more subtle expectation. Some believed that the Messiah would be a spiritual leader, someone who would bring inner renewal, forgiveness, and a new heart for God's people. This idea emphasized transformation over conquest and love over violence. Many faithful Jews looked forward to a Savior who would not only restore their nation, but also restore their relationship with God. This layered hope created a complex picture of what the Messiah might look like and how He would fulfill God's promises. It was this rich tapestry of expectations, part political, part spiritual, that set the stage for the arrival of Jesus. Yet, when He appeared, He challenged every preconceived notion, forcing His followers and critics alike to reconsider what divine salvation truly meant. From the earliest moments of their history, the Jewish people have carried a divine promise that shaped their identity and hope. This promise was rooted in the covenant made with Abraham, which assured that his descendants would become a great nation and that through them all nations would find blessing. Over centuries, this covenant became the foundation of their faith, inspiring generations to trust in God's faithfulness and to anticipate a future fulfillment. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel painted vivid visions of a coming Messiah, an anointed king who would bring justice, restore Israel, and establish an everlasting reign. These prophecies offered a picture of a powerful, victorious leader, someone who would rise from David's line, wield divine authority, and liberate God's people from oppression. The Jewish imagination was deeply shaped by these expectations. They envisioned this Messiah as a political and military ruler, someone who would overthrow foreign oppressors and re-establish Israel's sovereignty. This hope was not merely nationalistic, but also spiritual. Many believed that this leader would fulfill God's promises of salvation and righteousness. The idea of a conquering king resonated with their history of exile and suffering, fueling an eager anticipation for divine intervention. Their hopes were grounded in the understanding that God's covenant was unbreakable, and that the Messiah's arrival would mark the climax of divine history, a moment of divine justice and restoration. Yet within this hope lay a quieter, more nuanced expectation. Some longed for a Messiah who would bring inner renewal, someone who would transform hearts and minds, forgiving sins and creating new spirits. This spiritual dimension of expectation emphasized that salvation was not only about political liberation, but also about personal transformation and reconciliation with God. It was this layered hope that set the stage for Jesus' arrival, challenging the conventional images of a victorious ruler. The divine whisper hinted that God's plan was more profound than their limited expectations, that the Messiah's true victory would be achieved through love, humility, and sacrifice. This divine mystery, hidden in the depths of divine whisper, would soon confront the very hopes the people held dear, forcing them to reconsider what divine salvation truly meant and how it would come into the world. When Jesus entered the scene, he did not fit the typical mold of the expected Messiah. The prevailing hope among many Jews was for a leader who would rally armies, overthrow oppressors, and restore Israel's political independence. They anticipated someone with the strength of King David, a warrior king who would wield a sword and lead a national revival. But Jesus' teachings and actions challenged this deeply ingrained expectation. Instead of promoting violence or political rebellion, he emphasized love, forgiveness, and inner transformation. His message was about turning the other cheek, loving enemies, and seeking spiritual renewal. This was revolutionary, contradicting centuries of hope for a conquering hero. Jesus taught that his kingdom was not of this world, quoting John 18:36, "My kingdom is not of this world." To many, this was confusing. They expected a Messiah who would wield power visibly, who would liberate Israel from Roman rule through military might. Instead, Jesus came as a humble servant, emphasizing humility over dominance, peace over violence. This divergence from their expectations led many to doubt his divine identity, and some even saw his claims as blasphemous. His assertion in John 8:58, "Before Abraham was, I am," was perceived as blasphemy by religious leaders because it implied divine authority and equality with God, something they considered a grave violation of their understanding of monotheism. Furthermore, Jesus challenged the religious authorities of the day, the Pharisees and Sadducees. His teachings questioned their traditions, especially their oral laws, Sabbath customs, and purity rules. He exposed hypocrisy and emphasized true righteousness rooted in love and mercy. His boldness threatened the religious and political stability under Roman rule, and many saw him as a dangerous agitator. His insistence on inner purity and genuine faith undermined the authority of the religious leaders, making them feel challenged and exposed. These confrontations increased the hostility, and the more Jesus spoke of a different kingdom, the more he was perceived as a threat to the status quo. This clash of visions, divine authority versus human expectations, set the stage for rejection. Jesus was not the political liberator they anticipated, and his teachings made many uncomfortable because they called for an inward change that challenged their identity and power structures. His divine whisper of a different kind of kingdom was too radical, too mysterious, and ultimately too threatening to the religious and cultural fabric of the time. This divergence between divine purpose and human expectation became the core reason why many rejected him, laying the groundwork for what would become a profound, divine mystery that continues to echo through history. The tension between Jesus and the religious leaders of the time grew more intense as his teachings challenged the long-standing traditions they held sacred. The Pharisees and Sadducees saw his actions and words as a direct threat to their authority and the stability of their religious system. Jesus repeatedly questioned their reliance on oral laws and traditions that had been added to God's commandments, exposing hypocrisy and superficial righteousness. He emphasized that true worship came from genuine love for God and others, not just strict adherence to rituals or external purity. This message was revolutionary because it shifted the focus from rule-keeping to heartfelt devotion, which many leaders found uncomfortable and even dangerous. Jesus also challenged their understanding of the Sabbath and purity laws, advocating for compassion and mercy over rigid legalism. His healing on the Sabbath and his acts of kindness towards sinners and outcasts demonstrated that God's heart was for mercy and restoration, not judgment and exclusion. These actions angered the religious authorities who felt their authority was being undermined. They viewed Jesus' teachings as a threat to their control over the people's spiritual lives and a challenge to their interpretation of God's laws. His words, such as in John 8:58, "Before Abraham was, I am," were seen as blasphemous because they implied divinity, something the leaders believed was a violation of the monotheistic faith they cherished. The growing hostility was fueled by fear. Jesus was gaining followers, and his influence threatened to disrupt the religious and political stability under Roman rule. The leaders saw that his teachings could incite unrest, challenge their authority, and potentially lead to political rebellion. They believed that maintaining control over the people was essential, and any figure claiming divine authority or advocating love and forgiveness as the highest virtues endangered that control. Their response was to plot against him, seeing him not as the Messiah, but as a dangerous troublemaker. Their fear and misunderstanding ultimately led to their decision to confront Jesus directly, setting the stage for the tragic events that would unfold. This clash was not merely about religious doctrine, but about power, control, and the very nature of God's plan for salvation. It was a profound struggle between human authority and divine purpose, and it revealed how difficult it is for some to accept God's ways when they challenge human expectations. The mounting tension between Jesus and the religious authorities reached a critical point when they realized that his teachings challenged their authority and threatened the fragile balance of power. The leaders, especially Caiaphas and other high priests, saw Jesus not just as a spiritual teacher, but as a dangerous figure whose influence might ignite unrest among the people. Their fears were fueled by his growing popularity and his bold claims that subtly questioned their authority and interpretation of God's law. They believed that if Jesus continued to gather followers and challenge their traditions, it could incite rebellion, leading to chaos and perhaps even a crackdown from the Roman authorities, who kept a watchful eye on any possible uprising. This fear prompted the religious leaders to consider drastic measures. They understood that Jesus' message of love, forgiveness, and inner transformation was revolutionary, but they also saw it as a threat to their religious control. His actions, like healing on the Sabbath and associating with sinners, challenged their strict codes, and his claims to divine authority, exemplified by statements like in John 8:58, "Before Abraham was, I am," were seen as blasphemy. Such words to them were not just provocative, but sacrilegious, directly undermining the core of their faith. The authorities believed that if they allowed Jesus to continue his ministry, it could lead to a breakdown of religious order and possibly provoke Roman intervention, which could threaten their position and safety. In their desperation, they devised a plan to arrest Jesus quietly, hoping to avoid an open riot or the wrath of the people. However, they also knew that execution was necessary to prevent further dissent. Their decision was driven by a combination of spiritual rejection, seeing Jesus as a false prophet, and political calculation, fearing the loss of control and the consequences of unrest. They believed that Jesus' death was a necessary step to preserve their authority, their customs, and their way of life. In their minds, sacrificing Jesus was a way to maintain stability and prevent the chaos they feared might erupt if he continued his disruptive ministry. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of a dark chapter in history, where divine purpose was intertwined with human fears and ambitions. The decision to pursue Jesus' death was not made lightly. It was rooted in a complex web of genuine concern, misunderstanding, and the desire to protect their interests. Yet what they perceived as a necessity was, in truth, part of a divine plan unfolding, one that would ultimately lead to redemption and the realization of God's eternal purpose. The divine whisper of mystery deepened, revealing that even in rejection and darkness, God's plan for salvation was moving forward with divine precision. As we reflect on this divine whisper, this sacred story of rejection, hope, and divine purpose, it becomes clear that God's plan extends far beyond human understanding. The rejection Jesus faced was not a failure, but part of a greater divine tapestry, one woven with mercy, sacrifice, and ultimately salvation. It reminds us that God's ways often challenge our expectations and confront our comfort zones. Yet, within this divine mystery lies an unshakable hope, that even in moments of rejection and darkness, God's love is at work, drawing all people toward redemption. The story calls us to see beyond the surface, to recognize that God's sovereignty can turn rejection into a gateway for divine fulfillment, transforming despair into hope and shame into glory. This narrative warns us that the path of faith is rarely smooth or easy. It challenges us to remain steadfast when the world rejects what is true, when our beliefs are questioned, or when God's promises seem delayed. But it also invites us to trust in God's ultimate purpose, that His plan is perfect, even when we cannot fully see it. The divine whisper reminds us that God's love is greater than human rejection, and His mercy extends to all who seek Him. It is a call to humility, to surrender our expectations, and to embrace the divine mystery with faith that trusts in God's infinite wisdom. Yet, amid the warnings and challenges, there is profound hope. The story of Jesus' rejection points us toward a future where all of Israel will be saved, where God's promises will be fulfilled in fullness, and where divine reconciliation will reign. Romans 11 assures us that God's plan is not abandoned, but unfolding. Like the olive tree that bears both cultivated and wild branches, all are included in His divine grace. The divine whisper beckons us to hold on to this hope, to believe that God's mercy is greater than any rejection, and that His love will ultimately prevail. It encourages us to live with faith, courage, and compassion, knowing that God's redemptive purpose is at work in every moment, guiding history toward its divine climax. Let us then be bearers of this divine whisper, sharing the hope that God's love is never forsaken. Support this channel with your subscription so these sacred messages can continue to reach hearts hungry for truth. Like this video to honor the message and help it grow, spreading hope to others who need to hear it. Activate the notification bell to stay connected with content that can strengthen your faith and deepen your understanding of God's divine plan. Share this message with friends, family, and those searching for meaning, because the divine whisper is meant to echo through every corner of the earth. Remember, your faith and your voice matter in the unfolding story of divine redemption. Together, we can be part of God's divine purpose, bringing light where there is darkness, hope where there is despair, and love where rejection once reigned. And in this, may you find the strength to walk boldly, trusting that God's divine whisper continues to call us all into His eternal embrace.